Hello and welcome to our Syxsense December Patch Tuesday webinar. Today, we have our industry expert, Rob Brown, here to give us an inside look into the newest Patch Tuesday release. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and Rob will reach out after to answer those. And with that, Rob Brown.
Thanks, Johanna, and a very warm welcome to everyone on the last Patch Tuesday of the year. Can you believe it's been a long year, but it seems to have gone by super quick, and we're really excited to see a new year with new Patch Tuesdays coming in January. My name is Rob Brown. I'm head of customer success here at Syxsense. We've been delivering managed services for over 20 years, and in that time we've deployed over 200 million patches. We've been doing that by using some of the techniques I'm going to show you today to help you prioritize your patching and your vulnerability remediation to your own environment. Now, it is interesting because December is usually the smallest Patch Tuesday of the year, but we're going to go into more of that in just a second. There's a lot of interesting things that have happened over the last 24 hours. Now, to start off with some news. Now, our friends and colleagues in Ukraine have alerted us this morning that Ukraine's largest mobile communications provider went down in what appears to be a massive cyber attack. Now, they're saying that the data hasn't been stolen, so why would an attack like this take place? Well, interestingly enough, it wasn't data that was stolen. It was actually systems that were attacked to make them inoperative. This is a type of vulnerability we're going to talk about in this webinar today. It's actually to cause disruption, and it has actually been over a long period of time that this attack has been planned. So there's a few data points we are aware of, and actually this is super important to understand that not all exploits are immediate. Some of them actually are planned and take a long period of time. So we do know that this has happened over a long period of time. The environment was exploited and has had constant attempts to access that network over a long period of time as well. And then when the attack was launched, they were able to change a lot of things within the network itself to make the servers and the systems inoperative. So it was very coordinated. And we're going to talk about a few of those things today that will help you to prioritize your patching and vulnerability remediation based on the lessons from that particular attack. Now, it is interesting because last year we had the SolarWinds attack, and the SolarWinds attack was kind of exactly the same. It was remotely exploited using a vulnerability. They were able to move inside the network whilst they planned the attack, and then they launched it, which then had the sort of worldwide press coverage at the time. As we learn more about this particular attack, the data that we find that has been confirmed and that has been confirmed, we will then release an article for you so you can try to protect your environment as well, especially because we don't know exactly what the original exploit was that was used in the original exploit. But as soon as we do, we'll let you know. Now, as we come up to Christmas, we have to be aware that a lot of people are still internet shopping. Google Chrome released an update just yesterday, version 120 for Windows and Mac. That fixes 9 security issues and should be prioritized. Just last week, we had a weaponized version of Google Chrome that was released and obviously should be installed. However, I would highly recommend this one be installed as well. Of course, that particular version 120 will remediate everything from before. Now, there is another interesting version of Google Chrome that's been talked about, and we're actually kind of interested in this particular version, which is an extended support edition. So there is now an extended support edition for Google Chrome. It is a separate version to the standard version of Google Chrome that's on their website. And this one is a specific version, but the version will live for a bit longer, and it will have security updates for that version only. What is interesting is that Google have linked it to a group policy update. So they're sort of leveraging group policy in Windows to update the Google Chrome browser. And of course, with Azure and other non-Windows domain devices, that particular extended version of Google Chrome may be difficult to support. As soon as we get any more information on this particular version of Google Chrome, we'll put something on the news page, and hopefully you can check that out. Now, one of the biggest things I want to talk about is the Windows 10 and Windows 11 reboots. Now, over the period of this last year, we found it more this year than before, that we're finding it extremely difficult to apply a lot of the Windows 10 and Windows 11 cumulative updates that require reboots in order to become effective when the systems already have pre-reboot requirements. So you are using a tool set, maybe you're using Syxsense, or maybe you're using a different one, and you are installing an update and then you're rebooting your machine. Sometimes that update has actually been applied, but it requires the reboot to become effective. The reboot happens, and the device that already had an existing reboot to apply another update or a change or a driver, that update takes precedence because it was there before. So now that device has been rebooted and those pre-existing requirements have now been satisfied, but the update you've just deployed before that reboot can't apply because it has another reboot requirement of its own. The previous update is now interrupting this one, and the user has to reboot again. Now, a lot of customers that we are working with in our managed services will not allow regular reboots, at least on a day-to-day basis. They won't allow more than one reboot per day. This can actually extend, you could say, your non-compliance by a factor of weeks if you are only allowing one reboot per week. So you can install in week 1, but if you don't have all of those reboots satisfied, you may not actually remediate the vulnerability until week 2. This kind of pushes out the compliance somewhat. So when you're working with your environment, and if you can, for a New Year's resolution, to discuss with your company leadership about having midweek reboots that are only there to reboot devices that require the reboot. In Syxsense, we are able to track when a reboot is required. You can use that flag to identify those machines and actually reboot them. Don't install patches with that, so try not to put everything together. That is a very specific reboot that is only clearing what has which has been added as a reboot requirement, so that any other patching that takes place after that has a better chance of installing first time and giving you compliance first time. If you want any more information on what we've learned about both the pre and the post reboots, please get in touch with us. You can use the chat on the website. I'll show you that in a second. Or you can actually email us across at customersuccess@syxsense.com, and we'll give you all the data we have on that. But it's something we've been learning, and we think that just changing a little bit of the strategy, just this one little piece, will actually significantly improve your patch compliance for 2024. Now, if you were on our webinar probably 4 months ago, we were actually telling you that some of the preview updates that we were testing have made changes to the taskbar buttons inside Windows 11. So if you're familiar with Windows 10, you've got your nice taskbar on the bottom. You've got your icons and your applications that you have open, and you could have say 3 or 4 Word documents, a couple of browsers open, and each one will have its own icon on the bottom. Then we moved to Windows 11. The interface somewhat looked like an Apple OS, but the the taskbar changed significantly so that you couldn't expand those buttons, and actually you were only able to see little icons. So if you had a Word document or a browser open, you would see the icon, and you would have to hover over the icon, and then it would sort of expand vertically. Well, we have those new buttons now available. So if you search for your taskbar buttons in Windows 11, you can actually choose to hide the labels, show the labels, and actually it can dynamically make that decision based on how many apps you have open. So on my screen, for example, I have my PowerPoint, I have my notes and my web page all open, and I can see everything open at actually on my taskbar. Extremely convenient. The reason I mention this is because we've actually had a lot of customers say they want to stay on Windows 10 because the interface is pretty tricky to learn. So by offering an experience that's quite similar to Windows 10, but in the Windows 11, which we would prefer everyone to move to, it's the newest operating system and has the longest shelf life. This hopefully will help you to put Windows 11 into a schedule for 2024. We also had a 0 day. Now, this isn't necessarily a breaking 0 day. This is an AMD vulnerability, 2023-20588. This is a speculative leaks security notice. Now, interesting, this is actually within the cumulative updates that have been released by Microsoft, and it's focused on the AMD processor. So a division by 0 error on some processors can potentially return speculative data resulting in loss of confidentiality. Obviously, anything that the processor is processing, you could read it potentially, including anything like passwords as well. Now, the EPYC 7001 processors, those are the server processors. Those are impacted. And then the Athlon and the Ryzen 3000 series, which are the workstation processors, they are impacted as well. Keep an eye on this. It's very strange that hardware vendors would release updates for just a set of processors. I have a feeling we'll probably see more processors impacted as more data is available to the security industry. So please keep an eye. But you don't have specific AMD patches. These are wrapped within the cumulative updates. Now, CISA also released an update for Adobe. Interestingly enough, we don't have Adobe Reader in here, which is great, but we do have some of vulnerabilities that have been found that could exploit a system and take control of that system. So CISA are recommending that you apply these updates within the next 3 weeks. So there's nothing sort of massively urgent here. Prelude, Illustrator, InDesign, Dimension, Experience Manager, and Substance 3D as well, all impacted by that. Now, as I mentioned, Microsoft released the smallest feature update of the year. And interestingly, if I go back all the way to a year before I think we even started thinking about these Patch Tuesday webinars, we've not seen one this small in 5 whole years. We had 4 critical updates and 29 important updates fixed. However, we had 11 that are more likely to be weaponized, which is actually up on last month. We did have 0 weaponized and 0 public aware, but we did have 2 jump points. Now, when I mentioned the jump point, going back to my earlier news, the jump point is where a vulnerability, if exposed, can be used to access a system through one particular vulnerability and then move sideways or across once exposed. And so this is actually how the attack in Ukraine has happened and how SolarWinds was attacked before. They're able to expose an environment with a particular vulnerability that may have been low severity, but once they are in, they can lay the breadcrumbs to allow themselves to get back into that environment, potentially moving sideways. It's why it's so important in 2024 that if you have a patching team and a security vulnerability team, that those teams are working together to identify the patches that are missing and the vulnerabilities which are needing to be addressed so that you close all potential access points and improve your security posture. If you can do that in one tool, brilliant. If you can't, reporting on both is essential, and have one team at least reviewing both sets of data. If you can do that, then you'll be able to see what potentially is an exposure route into your environment. But those jump points are super important to close as soon as possible, regardless of severity. Now, we had 10 elevation of privilege vulnerabilities fixed. That's where a threat actor gains access to an employee's account, bypasses the proper authorization channel, and successfully grants themselves access to data they're not supposed to have. The worst of the lot are the remote code execution. So that's a class of cyber attack in which attackers remotely execute commands to place malware or other malicious code on your computer or network. We had 8 of those fixed this month. Spoofing is the act of disguise. We had 5 of those. Information disclosure, that's when a program unintentionally reveals sensitive information. And we had 5 denial of service vulnerabilities. That's simply meant to shut down the system, cause havoc, make it inaccessible. We didn't have any security feature bypasses, and we had 0 defense in depth this month. So how are we going to choose which patches are more important than others? Well, we call this a Syxsense score. It's a factor built of several elements to a particular vulnerability, starting with the vendor severity. So the vendor severity is critical, high, medium, low, and NA. That's the most serious to the least. The CVSS score, which has been updated to 4.0, is a calculation based on actual risk and potential exposure, and also complex methods to expose, also how complex it is to expose that vulnerability. And that has a score from 10 to 0. 10 being the worst, 0 being the least. Now, if you combine the two together, you have a better, more informed choice about the severity of the vulnerabilities you want to remediate in your cycle. Whether you can cycle all of those patches at once, or whether you have to band them into critical, medium, and low severity bands to get enough of those updates deployed as quickly as possible. Especially if some of those vulnerabilities are very serious. Next, we have the state of the vulnerability. So weaponization is where it's already being exposed. It's already being exploited in the wild. A lot of our data comes from the vendors themselves, plus our antivirus partners. And they let us know which CVEs are being weaponized, and we mark those in Syxsense. Not all tools do that. So we publish all of this data for everyone, regardless of the tool set you're using. Public aware does not mean the public is aware of the vulnerability, funnily enough. Public aware means that somebody has published to the internet exactly how you exploit a vulnerability. It doesn't always mean that everything that's public aware becomes weaponized. But I won't want to be an IT manager that said, hey, you know what, it was a low severity, non-weaponized vulnerability. It was public aware. There was steps to exploit, but I didn't prioritize that update. So potentially you want to add that into the decision-making process when you're choosing the patches you're deploying. Lastly, we have our countermeasure. Our countermeasure lets us balance, because some vulnerabilities can be mitigated, or you can have a workaround that you can deploy right now, and that will actually save you needing to deploy that patch as quickly as possible, or quickly as you need to. Maybe it's a registry key, or maybe you've got a high sophisticated antivirus that already is mitigating you from risk. So we add that into the score, and that's kind of balances the vulnerability out a tiny bit. And then lastly, we have your exposure. So the more exposed you are to the higher severity, higher risk state with no countermeasure, those are the vulnerabilities you should be prioritizing. If you're building out your bands, or if you're choosing your patching strategy based on one of these alone, then potentially you can build them all together, and anything that has a higher exposure should be prioritized. Now we're going to take a look at our website because we're going to analyze what Microsoft has released for us. Now we actually do publish this on the Patch Tuesday day. It actually gets released so everyone can actually read that and subscribe to it. So if you pop across to syxsense.com, you'll find our new and updated website, which looks fantastic. You'll find along the top our resources section that includes all of the news and the events, especially around Patch Tuesday. If you have any questions, please use the chat function in the bottom right corner. That's where you would ask for any support about a patching strategy, or maybe you need some help with a testing strategy, or in fact, if you need any help with a security vulnerability scanner to see if maybe your environment is exposed for anything we've talked about today. Now on the resources section, you go to the news page where you can subscribe and you can actually access the December Patch Tuesday write-up. Now, what is interesting about this Patch Tuesday, we didn't have any .NET frameworks at all. So the number of fixes this month is much lower. As I said, lowest we've seen in 5 years. We had no .NET framework updates, and we had no preview updates last week either. This spells a bit of risk because traditionally when Microsoft doesn't release a preview update in the month before, they don't get exposure to all of the customers for those patches that do the testing before they appear in the next Patch Tuesday release as an official patch. This does mean in January, I will be reminding you to do extra testing for all patches in January, because in this Patch Tuesday month, we didn't have any preview updates. So it's very important to remind yourselves that in January, you need to do more testing for December patches that are coming in that month. So we had 4 critical updates. One of the CVSSs had a score of 9.6. We'll talk about that in a second. We had updates for Microsoft Windows, components, Office and Office components, Azure, DNS, DHCP, and Microsoft Dynamic Tools also had fixes. Now, we had a combined CVSS score of 208.2, which was actually a half of last month, so there's not really any decent data there. But the average CVSS score was 7.2. Last month, it was 7.6. That does tell us that a lot of the vulnerabilities in this month are actually kind of higher risk. So although we have a lot less vulnerabilities, that doesn't mean you don't have to deploy in December. Please make it a priority. I've chosen 3 vulnerabilities, and I've got one that I'm going to highlight as well as a bit of a freebie. Now, the Microsoft Power Platform connector spoofing vulnerability. This is a vulnerability in the web server, and but the malicious scripts can execute in the victim's browser on the machine. So this is actually one of the vulnerabilities that has a jump point. Now, Microsoft Power Platform is a line of business intelligence apps that allow connectivity such as Power BI that integrate with products like GitHub and Teams. Now, what is not so clear is how you apply this update. So you may be looking in Syxsense right now for the CV, or you may be looking on the Microsoft Update site itself. It doesn't actually exist. This is an update within Azure itself. So you need to go into Azure, into the admin portal, and you can actually apply the update through there. This is one that has the highest CVSS of the month. So if you are using Azure, if your devices are Azure-based, go into Azure and make sure you apply this update. My second is 2023-35641. This is internet connection sharing. Now, I know what you're saying. You probably don't have any devices with ICS installed. However, I am aware in retail and in hospitality that devices within remote stores and locations that need access to the internet, that can't have direct access to the internet, often do use ICS. Now, this has been probably changed with other technology, but in those environments, do you still have ICS installed? You do need to make sure you have a tool that can detect if the ICS sharing service is enabled. That's easy to do in Syxsense. We can actually pick that up in our Cortex solution. If you don't, you do need to make sure if that service is installed that you apply this update or disable that service and uninstall it. Now, to exploit this vulnerability, an attacker would need to send a maliciously crafted DHCP message to a server that runs the internet connection sharing service. Microsoft is saying that exploitation is more likely, and it is a remote code execution, which means it's used to spread ransomware. My third choice is actually, I had a kind of a selection to pick because they had similar CVSSs and similar severities and similar CVSSs. So I went with the one that Microsoft said was more likely to be exploited, which was the 2023 35639. That one is the ODBC driver remote code execution vulnerability. Now, an attacker could exploit this vulnerability by tricking an authenticated user into attempting to connect to a malicious SQL server. So a lot of tools are using databases now. ODBC is very popular, which could result in the server receiving a malicious networking packet that could be used to execute remotely on the client. So very serious. This one is a critical severity, CVSS of 8.8. Its risk factor is that it can attack across any network, including the internet. So anything that is internet facing could in fact be exposed. Attack complexity is low. Privilege required is none. User interaction is required. Luckily, we don't have a jump point. Now, lastly, the one I want to mention, which actually came across my desk by my team, is CVE 2023-35628. So this one is actually below these others, which I actually skipped across because of a very specific trend or a vulnerability that we've seen already exposed this year. This is the Windows MS HTML platform remote code execution vulnerability. It is critical in nature, has a CVSS score of 8.1. Now, this particular vulnerability, if an attacker could exploit it by sending a specially crafted email, which triggers automatically when it's retrieved and processed by the client. So you only have to send it, and as soon as it's received, it could be exploited. This could lead to exploitation before the email is even viewed in the preview pane. Now, this one is very similar to another vulnerability we've seen earlier on this year. So a state-sponsored threat actor tracked APT28. They've been exploiting another vulnerability, which also was a zero-click Outlook vulnerability, which were able to expose dozens of organizations within NATO, as confirmed by Palo Alto, which we listen to as one of our security advisors. That previous vulnerability was called 2023-23397. It was patched earlier on this year, so if you've already applied it, fantastic. However, this vulnerability is exactly like that one, and that particular vulnerability was weaponized. So potentially, there are threat actors looking for ways to use previous weaponized vulnerabilities, learn how that code works, try to find other ways of attacking other vulnerabilities. So I thought I'd bring that to your attention. All of the other vulnerabilities we have today are listed down this list. Just take the CVE from this list, pop it into your toolset, and if you have a high exposure to it, do put that into your patching strategy for this month. If you don't use Syxsense as a tool, finally, you can book a demo just to see how our toolset works and how we might be able to work together to help you resolve any patching or security vulnerabilities that we find in your environment. It's been a wonderful delight this year to host the Patch Tuesday webinar series. I really look forward to for you joining me again in January. And until next time, happy patching.